Hi, I'm Brent, and this is going to be a quick video just talking about some of the basics of picking a color scheme and color theory, such as primaries and secondary colors, neutral colors, and spot colors on your model. Alright, now the thing is, when you're picking a color scheme for your model, you have to consider what your primary colors are. Whether it's blue, yellow, red, green, or you've got two primary colors, and then what your secondary colors are and your spot colors. And just for example, I'm going to show you a couple models I've already painted. This guy is my jump pack chaplain for a spaceman army I'm working on. Anyhow, as you can see, his main color is black, and his spot colors are red and gold, and his secondary is bone and the parchment, which is a sort of light khaki or bone color. And the whole point of his model is that he's more restrained. He's a very restrained sort of colored model. Like, all that black keeps it very dark, forbidding, and very restrained in sort of the color scheme. And so stuff like the red and gold really pops on the black background, and particularly the white emblem on his shoulder. Now, black is obviously his primary color, and bone is his secondary color. And bone's a good secondary color because it's very neutral, it's very restrained, doesn't sort of take away from any primary or any bright colors. It just sort of fills in extra space without sort of drawing too much attention to itself. Whereas the red and gold on this model, the gold and red just pops like anything, really draws attention to itself, so you can easily see the purity seals, all the gold that's on his model, his jump pack cables even, in silver. And those are what you might say are your secondaries and your spot colors. Because spot colors, they're meant to contrast with your primaries, secondaries, and neutral colors and draw attention to themselves, such as faces on human models or emblems on the Space Marines, like his shoulder emblem there. The white really sticks out compared to the black and the red and gold, and the red contrasts very nicely with his black and such. And when you're sort of choosing your colors, you have to choose ones that have a great deal of contrast. For the more you want something to stick out, the brighter and the more contrasting to your primary you want it. So let's take a look at a model who's not so darkly colored. This is a Imperial Fist Captain I just sort of painted as sort of a project just to enjoy. And as you can see, his main color is a lot brighter, the yellow. He's primarily yellow, and that's quite bright and shows nicely. Anyhow, his secondary is red, which contrasts quite a lot with yellow, and so that's why I did on the sort of the chest eagle and the rims of his shoulder pads. Looks quite nice. And all the other colors, the gold still shows up nicely, but it's not so much a spot color, whereas his face, being flesh, it's quite contrasting to the yellow and the red, and sticks out quite nicely to be the spotlight. So you're drawing attention to his face there. And there's not a really lot else going on this one besides the yellow, the red, the black, and the flesh, and the silver. And the red and yellow are the primary and secondaries. Gold is fairly restrained on him, so because the yellow is so bright for his primary, so gold's fairly neutral on it. And the black sort of draws attention to itself because it contrasts so much with the yellow, and that's sort of the color theory I was telling you about. So I wanted the black to, really draw attention to his markings, and that's what it does when it's compared to yellow. Whereas you couldn't have black markings on that chaplain because that wouldn't work at all. That's why his markings are white. Now, this is another model, a fantasy model this time, and he is the Great Sword Captain Finecast model. I really like Finecast. I reckon it's a good system. And his primary colors on his sort of sleeves and his cloth is yellow and blue. They're the colors of Nordland, and I've copied them on the feathers of his head as well. And I've gone for a sort of restrained pastel-y yellow. I didn't want to go too bright on the yellow for him, considering that the blue's so rich. And if you had rich blue next to such a really bright yellow, it just wouldn't look very realistic. It'd look kind of too heroic. So I've gone for more restrained pastel yellow. And the gold and gold and the silver metal are his secondary colors, and they're fairly restrained. They're fairly restrained compared to such bright primary colors. The blue and yellow is primary. So the gold and silver is still very, very restrained, and because they're neutral, they don't sort of take away too much from the primaries. You can sort of see the primaries quite easily. And the red on his sword and cloth is very, very contrasting. Sticks out compared to red and yellow because it's the third primary colour. So it's quite nice like that. And the cloth is a neutral colour, so that doesn't draw too much attention to itself. And his hat's brown, fairly neutral colour, not drawing attention to itself. But his face and hands are skin colour, quite contrasting to the rest of it, which is all primary colours, or neutral. So his face having that sort of skin colour manages to stick out a lot, and you notice his hand as well. And the orc head is the last bit of sort of spotting, or would say contrasting. Nice detail. And the green really draws attention to itself when you compare it to the other primaries in this on this guy. See that orc head there. Now, one more model just to show the same sort of theory. This guy is the model from Battle for Microwatch, who I recently painted, just as sort of a joy, instead of a painting I wanted to do for the fun of it. And he's a very restrained palette. I always try to use a limited palette with my models. I don't want to be flamboyant and have lots of different colours on them, because I don't think that looks so good, whereas restrained makes it look more realistic and a bit grittier. Now this guy, he has a dark blue cloth, dark grey armour. If you can tell, his dark grey armour doesn't stick out much from the blue at all, but when you look up close, you can sort of see how it's a grey armour, and I assume it's fairly restrained. I don't want his colours to look like Imperial Navy, so restrained, blue and grey, and it makes his flesh and the gold and silver on his armour pop like anything, really stands out, especially the buttons. And on his back, you've got multicoloured cables, which they show quite nicely compared to the rest of his colours, and I've gone for yellow, red, and purple because I didn't want to go for green at all, because I'd be worried that's too many colours on this palette, whereas red and purple sort of ally with his blue cloth, and the yellow is a spot colour, so drawing attention to itself, much like the flesh. Anyhow, you can see that properly. I'm just, yeah. So that's that. Anyhow, I've got a lot more plans for future videos, so stay tuned, because I'm gonna do a video pretty soon about assembling and preparing Finecast, which is that's one of my favourite things. Finecast, it's very fun to work with. You can get a lot done with it. Like, there's some good models, and using liquid green stuff is pretty tricky. And hopefully, I'll have some tips that could help you out with that. And Finecast can be pretty delicate to work with, so it's good to have someone to know how to sort of handle it. Also, going to do another video on layering, where I'm going to look at dry brushing a bit more. Just not dry brushing, overbrushing. I'm going to show what overbrushing and flat brushing, which I mentioned in my previous layering video, but I'm going to explain them and show them how I overbrush and flat brush to pick up certain details. And I was also going to do a video on painting faces, because I know some hobbyists have a lot of trouble painting faces and flesh, so I was going to show the sort of tips, tricks, and how I like to paint faces. Anyhow, thanks for watching, and enjoy painting.